what we're looking at today is we're going to be looking at the style of formal writing, or having a look at formal writing in a little bit more detail. What we're going to be doing in this slide is just going through everything that you need to do and every, I guess, specific thing, which is what you need to look at in formal writing. All right, so it's essential that you employ formal writing techniques, not only to ensure that you're using the correct structure, it gives your answer a lot more authority. As you're writing, and we'll go through some examples of this as we go, what you're writing should sound like you're coming from an authoritative source, as in that you're an expert. It will help not only to sort of eliminate any vague or unspecific points in your writing, it will make you sound like you know what it is you're talking about. Now, that's obviously a very good quality that you understand, or you seem like you're someone who knows what they're talking about. But really, that's what formal writing's about. It's about giving you that impression. And certainly if you write something in informal English, it sort of gives the impression that it doesn't quite come across as you're an expert or something along those lines. Really, think of it like when you read textbooks and you see that the way that they are written, they're often written in quite formal English. And that's because they often seem like they are an authority, and you trust the information that's in there because it does seem like it comes from an authority. So really, that's what you're trying to, I guess, match or emulate when you're writing in the formal style. So we'll go through some examples of it. First of all, impersonal writing involves using objective details that do not refer to you. So you are not referring to you as such. And what you need to do is replace something like we with specifically who we represent. We have a problem with crime becomes Australia has a higher than average level of criminal activity. And this is to go straight on to the specifics. That sounds like it comes from a source. Yes, it does, because you're basing that information and that discussion on a source. But it has a lot more authority than if you just say we have a problem with crime, because that statement up the top, just the first question anyone's going to ask is who says? Who says that? Where? Who's we? Whereas if you say Australia has a higher than average level of criminal activity, that shows that you've got a little bit more authority, that you're saying it's higher than average. Okay, so there's obviously some research that's gone into that. Hopefully then you'll support it with an actual specific to say what that average is, whether that's a worldwide average or if it's an average over the last 100 years or so. That helps to make your argument sound so much stronger than if you just say we have a problem with crime. And that's again what formal writing helps you to achieve. Again, let's have a look at grammar, because this is the next process, which is perfect grammar involves using grammar according to its rules. So you should be writing focusing on adding complex sentences, which essentially support everything it is you're saying in the middle of a sentence, but also follows the correct rules. Let me just go through that. So you're not cutting off things mid-sentence, you're not starting a sentence with a contraction or anything else like that, or a conjunction or anything along those lines. You're writing long flowing sentences, which essentially represent not only correct grammar rules, but also really help to develop your idea. Let's go through the example. In the text, the theme of belonging is expressed through hyperbole and irony, techniques which enhance the sense of Juliet's attachment to her home. Okay, so again, there's an immediate sense there that it's coming from authority because of the fact that you are immediately referring to specific techniques, which you will then go into information and elaborate on. Directly state what it is that those techniques represent. So in this case, it's Juliet's attachment to her home. Now that's what using perfect grammar will do, is it will enable you to go directly onto what does what, rather than sort of vaguely going around. So if you use a colloquial here, which you just say hyperbole and irony, which makes her feel like she's at home, there's not strong sort of sense to that as much as there is if you say Juliet's attachment to her home. That's saying specifically what it is that those two things are representing. So using formal grammar in that sense will help your argument, again, create that sense of authority. All right, correct tense. Okay, so the other main point of grammar that we'll be looking at is correct tense. Now, correct tense is something that comes up frequently when I'm marking essays. The reason is because of the fact that one of the things that's really, really hard to do, particularly, and this is obviously something that happens in creative writing as well, is thinking about the exact order when things happen and referring to something that, for instance, has happened, or your current interpretation of a text as something that's in past tense, sort of ruins the effect, because what you should be trying to argue is the way that you see things is something that's true now. And if you're talking about something that's a historical event, then again, you're referring to it in the correct tense as well. Now, this might seem like a very minor point, but it's something that does come up, and it's something that does help to not only make sure that you've got very strong meaning in your writing, but it helps to fix up one of those small little errors. Let's have a look at an example first of all, and this is something that's in present tense. So Gerard is portrayed as a rebellious teenager whose distrust of authority often causes conflict between his family and results in violent outbursts. Now this is in present tense. Now why is it in present tense? Because it's an unchanging representation of the story. So even though I read the story in the past, my interpretation of it is something that is unchanging. And the reason why representation of the story, or my interpretation of the story, is unchanging is because the text itself is unchanging. Now, its meaning may change, but the text itself and the actual physical book and words of it is something that doesn't change. Even though my interpretation could be different from someone else's, and the meaning might change over time, particularly when you look at something like a Shakespearean text, for instance, what you're arguing is you're arguing that this is a current interpretation and it's based on your own facts, ideas, and understanding. Now, let's have a look at another example and go through a difference between something that's referring to the past and present at the same time. So if I was to discuss the fall of the Berlin Wall in context of a text. Now, the history of the event, as in when the wall fell, would be something that you would write about in past tense. However, if I was to indeed talk about the effects on society today, that would be in present tense. Now, the reason for that is obviously the effects on society today are things that are ongoing and are true at the time of writing. Whereas the history of the event is something that has happened in the past, so you'll be referring to it in its correct tense as well. Now, to make those two distinctions quite clear, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you use the correct tense, and the reason for that is to make sure that these things are separated from each other. As I said, it only seems like a very minor point, and it is, but it's one that you really need to make sure that you clarify. Alright, let's have a look at language. Language needs to be simple and specific, and we'll go straight into an example in a second. So let's go through some rights and some wrongs, and we'll go through traits of the language which make it inappropriate for an essay. First of all, let's go for the right. So several species of American beaver are threatened with extinction as a result of heavy forest clearance and introduced species. Now this is a discussion which, if you find evidence or statistics on the heavy forest clearance or introduced species and then compare those with numbers, you'll have a very specific argument. In this case, it's referring specifically to the beaver and what is threatening it. So it's answering whatever that question may have been. But there are things there which may be a wrong interpretation, and we'll just go through them in a second. Some wrongs. First of all, tragically, many unfortunate animals are threatened by logging. Now, the reason why, you might be asking, is that not appropriate for an essay, is it makes very emotional statements and very opinionated statements. As in, tragically, many unfortunate animals. So tragically and unfortunate are very much emotional terms, and it's trying to present an emotional argument. You would just say many beavers are threatened by logging. So ignore the things like tragedy and unfortunate, because those words are irrelevant and they don't really add to any of the meaning. And it just seems like you're trying to make an emotional statement rather than so much a factual one. Another wrong. Species of very little beavers are needlessly threatened by the reckless and dangerous activity of unprecedented forest clearance. Okay, you can probably cut about 5 words out of that sentence. There's way too much description in there. Furry, no, not needed at all. Even very little. Are needlessly threatened. Needlessly, okay, get rid of that too. Threatened by reckless and dangerous activity. Now, you could describe that as being words that could refer to what the forest activity is, but you probably only need one of them. And again, unprecedented forest clearance, based on what? That one you would actually need to provide evidence for, which you probably won't need to actually find. If you just say species of animals are threatened by forest clearance, that's a much simpler sentence and it allows you to go into deeper discussion rather than overriding it like this one is. You could write this literally in a much, much shorter sentence and then go through some more detail or go through an example which would help to support your claim. Another wrong. Beavers are dying because of people. Again, that doesn't really solve anything. That doesn't really give any specifics, and particularly not like the first example gave. If you're just saying they're dying because of people, okay, well, why? Discuss why. Why are they being threatened? Again, that's one of those things that you need to try and be more specific. So if you're just saying what people are doing and you're discussing that further, then that's what you should be trying to do. Is focus at least on a specific rather than just saying broadly people. Okay, we know it's people, but what specifically the people are doing. Let's have a look at next part, which is organization. This is the last part we'll look at, which is your writing must interpret ideas, discuss them, and represent them as fact. Essentially, this is looking at your organization of your formal writing style, which is the purpose of writing in a formal way, is that you can show that you're interpreting ideas, that you can discuss them in a way which is representing them as fact. Rather than try and explain what that means, I'll just go for an example and explain it that way. So the raven is a symbol which indicates desperation and seeks to represent the narrator as desperate. So this is entirely an opinionated statement, yet it is portrayed as if it was fact. So let's go for a couple of qualities of that first. Okay, first of all, instead of saying it suggests desperation, which would seem like it's more opinionated, it indicates desperation. This would have to be proven, but if you're discussing it, then hopefully you'll be using your evidence to try and prove that statement. And seeks to represent the narrator as desperate, again, is one of those statements that isn't necessarily true, but is represented as if it is fact, and is actually showing that this is the author's intention, when it may not necessarily be so. Pretty much through the process of writing it in a formal way and using specifics like those, you are not only matching the basics of formal writing, but you're writing in specifics, you're answering the question, and you're developing an argument in such a way that you are helping to deepen your understanding, or show that you have a deep understanding of what it is you're discussing, and that you're matching the criteria of the question, which is quite often what your criteria will entail, is that you can discuss and expand, and that's that key word, expand on the key point. This is what you should be trying to do, is find some things which are your opinion, and then write about them in such a way where they are represented as fact. There are a lot of examples in this one, and it's much easier to show what formal writing looks like than try to explain it. What you need to be looking at doing is writing about things specifically rather than vaguely. You should be trying to think about writing in such a way where you are not referring to things as if you're having a conversation, but actually find ideas and evidence from your stimulus text or the question or whatever it is that you're referring to in your answer. Also, to make sure that what really you're trying to do is develop an argument in such a way that you're trying to convince someone, and not do so in a way which is emotional or passionate, but just simply does so on the basis of the facts that are there. How you as a student, how you as a scholar, if you would like to call yourself that, interprets the ideas and then is able to discuss them in your own way. So that's basically it for the style of formal writing. Have a look again if you are stuck. I mean, it's something that takes a lot of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's really a natural way to write, and it also will really help to give you a very deep argument without necessarily having to have a lot of really expansive vocabulary or really sharp and interesting ideas. You can actually talk about it in a very boring sort of way and still get very good marks just through going into depth and really constructing an airtight discussion. Otherwise, that's about it. Until next time, I'll see you later.